All right, I'll go ahead and get started. I know everybody probably has busy schedules and I want to be able to get through everything and get through your questions. So hopefully you are here today for the appointments on grants session that we're doing. Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate it. If you haven't had the opportunity to attend any of the other ones, they are on our website, all recorded, as well as the PowerPoints being out there as well. For those of you I haven't met, I am the Associate Director. I'm Shelley Mosier, the Associate Director of Research Administration Post Award. And to let you know what we'll be discussing today as far as appointments on grants, the main one that often comes up on grants is faculty, and then graduate assistantships and hourly student appointments, our positions, staff and temp employees, and I'll do a brief forms demonstration. For those of you potentially new to the grant side, this is our staff within our office, the post award team. All right, so as you receive a grant in your department, and the best thing to start with is to begin reviewing the grant budget and the justification that has been provided. If you do not have a copy of that, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll definitely be able to get you a copy so that you have that within your area to be able to review. And always keep in mind, we want to directly appoint people when we can to the grant. Most federal sponsors require that the direct appointment be on the grant because too many transfers can draw attention and could be disallowed if we're transferring too much. So the top priority is to appoint people directly on the grant when we can. I didn't address in the beginning, if you have questions throughout this, you can either raise your hand or put it in the chat and we can address them as we go, but I will have some time at the end to address any more questions that you may have. All right, as I mentioned in the beginning for the agenda, we do have faculty appointments, we have student appointments, the graduate assistantships and hourly student appointments. We have temporary employees, staff positions, and then the different R positions. So faculty, the biggest thing is, when is the work being completed? Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, you do want to look at the budget, but things can change from when the proposal was submitted and what was budgeted. So you always want to determine when you're going to appoint them based on when the actual work is being completed. So if the faculty are doing the work during the academic year, then it would be buyout or release time. They're kind of coincide with each other, the titles. You would use the planned effort form. And what this does is it redistributes the faculty's time that they're spending on the grant from the department onto the grant. You want to make sure that you submit this form to us before the buyout period begins. If it does come to us late, then the department would have to do any journal entries for pay periods that are missed. So if the work is being done in the summer, then you would do a summer salary worksheet. This summer salary worksheet is required to reflect all appointments during the summer. So if the person is on multiple grants, any appointments that they have during the summer on those multiple grants would be reflected here, as well as any instructional appointments that they would have. Once the form is completed, you'd submit it to us. And then once it is approved, you can then go ahead and submit the PeopleSoft HR workflow form. If you happen to submit that workflow form prior to us completing the worksheet, we just wouldn't be able to approve the workflow form until we have this summer salary worksheet completely approved. Something to keep in mind, even during the academic year, is that faculty and faculty who are on administrative appointments cannot work more than 1.0 FTE during any given time. So if they are doing grant work and they're to be appointed on a grant for that time, it would have to be buyout during the academic year. And then in the summer, that's what this summer salary worksheet does, is it helps determine that they're not going over the 1.0 FTE. No overload appointments are allowed on grants, or even if you have any grant time, you can't have an overload appointment. All right, going on to students, graduate assistantships. You'll want to follow the university procedures for assistantships by working with the graduate college and what other requirements you might have within your colleges. You'll want to make sure you request a detail code from financial aid through the Banner workflow, so that once the appointment is approved, you can submit the Banner tuition piece. You always want to keep in mind the start and end date of the grant. The PeopleSoft HR workflow side will stop you from submitting the appointment if you're putting dates that are not within the grant period. But the Banner workflow form does not look at the dates. So you want to keep that in mind before you submit the appointments. We do have the ability to do a pre-award account if the award has not officially arrived at the university. And you'll also hear us refer to that as a backstop. You can submit that form to have an account set up so that you're not appointing your student when they are they are working. And two, that you're not using your department funds and then later wanting to transfer it. As I mentioned, we want to make sure we can directly appoint people on the grant when we can, and the backstop helps with that. Hourly graduate appointments, you can appoint instead of providing an assistantship. I mean, the preferred is definitely the assistantship, but if you appoint them, you can do an hourly graduate, appointment. If there is tuition budgeted and you want to provide the student tuition as well, the scholarship form needs to be submitted when you actually have the student on their hourly appointment. It is usually required on grants that there is the work component, unless the grant is specifically just for scholarship tuition. So anytime you might submit a scholarship form, if we don't see an appointment out there for the student, we will need further justification of why you're putting through a scholarship for the student if they aren't working currently on the grant. Hourly student appointments for undergrads. Again, you follow the university procedure, whatever might be your college requirements, your department requirements. Always, again, keeping in mind the start and end date of the grant. If you need to do a backstop, go ahead and do that so that student can get paid, and then you're not having to do transfers later or forget that transfers needed to be made. And then kind of a tip to help with the student appointments, maybe to put a reminder out there on your calendar for when the either grant is ending, so that you can appoint the student to a new grant, or if the grant gets extended, that you have a reminder to go ahead and get the student's appointment going. Temporary employees. So you might have some past students, or even if they're not enrolled in the summer, you can use the temporary appointment form to appoint individuals who would be working on the project. Same thing I've mentioned before, you want to keep in mind that start and end date. The backstop is available if the grant hasn't been officially here, so that you can get people paid. And then similar, maybe you need to mark your calendar to make sure that these appointments don't lapse and people are getting paid. Something also to keep in mind that's been coming up a lot with temporary employees is remote work. You definitely want to work with HR as far as where the individual is living. There are restrictions on certain states, and so that you find that out before you submit the appointment and find out that that person can't be on a appointment with the state that they're living in. Staff in our positions, so this first part that I'll be discussing is the appointments that can be directly on the grant. You'll want to work with budgets to get the position authorization form. You'll follow the university procedures for creating a new position, or maybe you're hiring into an existing position. Employees that are hired directly on a grant, a reminder that they would start when the grant starts, or if the grant has already started, because you had to post the position and go through the interview process, and then the end dates on that are based on the grant end date. So you want to make sure on the posting as well as the position authorization that you're putting the end date of the grant. Because of those terminal dates, you want to make sure if the grant has another year or it has an extension, that you're processing the paperwork to extend the employee's appointment. And then same with terminating the appointment. You want to make sure you put through the proper paperwork to end the appointment so that individuals don't continue to get paid. It does end up falling on the department if those terminal appointments do not end in time. Usually, if someone has been overpaid, it is the department's responsibility to try and recover the funds, but if you can't, then it ends up being transferred over to the department. Sometimes, if we have not received that next year of funding or the renewal, or are waiting for a no-cost extension, you can also do a backstop for that. So the account is already established, but with that backstop, what you're doing is allowing to continue to use that account to allow the individual's appointment to continue. And if we, for some reason, don't get that next year of funding or approved for the no-cost extension, then any of those pay periods that are beyond the original end date of the grant would be the responsibility of the department. And that's what that backstop form indicates. You provide an alternate account if the grant does not get extended. And I did already talk about when the project ends, you want to make sure you're submitting that paperwork to end the appointment. So appointments that cannot be directly on a grant. This is usually when somebody would have a split appointment. So if they already have, and we give the example of an administrative assistant, if they already have that appointment in their department, and they were written into the grant budget for 20% of their time to be on the grant, you can't split the appointment. So as I noted here is in order for administrative clerical salaries to be on a grant, the FTE or the time being spent on the grant has to at least be 0.15 FTE. Otherwise, they consider that, and when I say they, the federal government considers that to be part of the indirect cost recovery that we receive. So when the position is hourly and it can't be directly appointed on the grant, we have a time and effort hourly form that should be filled out at least monthly. And the department would then submit that form with the timesheets to show the differing hours. So what time was spent on their main appointment and what hours were spent for the grant. And then you would complete, the department would complete the journal entry to transfer those pay periods for that month. And we would then use your time and effort hourly form with the timesheets for reviewing and can approve then your journal entry. If that hourly person is consistently every pay period going to work, let's say 10 hours a week on that grant, always, you can use the planned effort form because it's a consistent number of hours that they would be working every pay period. You can use that planned effort form, but you would still need to submit timesheets to us in order for us to approve those journal entries that you're doing. So when a position is salaried, you would use the planned effort form always. And the planned effort form for salaried, we use that then to enter into the PeopleSoft HR system, and it distributes the individual's pay every pay period automatically. No need for journal entries. The only time a journal entry would be needed is if the form is being submitted late. And then it's on the department to go ahead and do those journal entries for the pay periods that were missed. Any changes to appointments? So if you're extending the end date of appointment, the grant has received continuation. Staff in our positions, you'll want to submit the staff transaction form. And then for graduate assistantships and hourly appointments, you'll be submitting new appointments when that extension comes in. When there is a change in the department ID, so if your grant is renewed or the appointment is going on a different grant and there is a different department ID or cost center, then you would change for staff in our positions, you would use the position authorization form because you're changing the position itself to now be on a different account. If that position authorization gets submitted late, the department would be responsible for submitting the JES. I see somebody has raised their hand. Go ahead, Kim.
When we do the planned effort form, that doesn't actually pay people.
No.
So I just wanted to, because I've helped some other people, they think when they do the planned effort, that actually pays people, but that's not the mechanism for payment. We still have to follow either the college or the university method for processing payments.
Correct. So during the academic year, faculty would, if their time is on the grant, you would do the planned effort form, and all that is doing is redistributing that faculty appointment over to the grant. If there is approval for a incentive pay with that, then yes, they would work with the department and the college for that incentive pay because it isn't for additional work, the additional work, more or less, that was on the grant is already redistributed. So any additional pay really is not for additional work. It would be with a within the department and college based on what was approved.
Yeah, and I did just put in the chat the list that I got from HR
Oh, great.
of the approved states where it's not just part-time faculty, it's anybody. It's a small list.
Great, thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
All right. For graduate assistantships, when there's changes and hourly student appointments, when there's changes to the appointments, you would submit, if there's a new account, you want to submit new forms. If there's a change, you can go ahead and do a manager's self-service transaction form on there to switch the appointments over. When it's the termination of appointment, a grant is ending, someone is resigning, or a student has dropped out. Staff in our positions, you can submit the staff transaction form to term that appointment. And as I mentioned earlier, that if the form is not submitted in time, it does fall back on the department for any pay that was provided to the individual beyond the grant end date. And then for student appointments, you can submit that manager self-service transaction to end the student appointment or the assistantship. All right. Any questions before I get into the forms demonstration? All right. The first form we will go over is the planned effort form. Sorry, I'm trying to move stuff around and it's not cooperating with me here. Okay. All right, can everybody see this budget in this planned effort form? Okay, so not all budgets will look this way, but this is the internal Excel spreadsheet that the research officers have to assist faculty with putting their budgets together. So oftentimes this is what we use and the departments can use as well because it's much more helpful oftentimes than the actual sponsors, but it does match because it needs to match. This just is easier to read and understand a little bit better. So we are looking at Jane Doe here, and oftentimes you will see personnel will be split on here if they are academic year or summer. And the reason for that is there are different fringe rates for academic year and then summer. So there'll usually be potentially 2 lines for somebody if they have academic year time and they have summer time. So Jane Doe here is indicating that it's academic year. And as I mentioned earlier, It is dependent on when the work is being done. So please make sure that these appointments are being based on when the work is done. So you want to make sure before you submit these planned effort forms, it's confirmed that the work is going to be done, in this case, during the academic year. So Jane Doe was budgeted at 25,000. So this top part of the form is pretty self-explanatory. You're putting in the individual who is spending time on the grant, their name, their employee ID, which home department their faculty appointment is, which college they are in, their home department fund and cost center, and then the grant fund and cost center, the project title. What is the period of appointment? You want to keep in mind, again, the grant dates. You know, if the grant did not start till 9/1, you wouldn't be able to start this until 9/1. And then through the end date. If the end date of the grant ends 4/30, you can't go beyond 4/30. And then the project termination date, and then what funds were budgeted for the salary. It's 25,000 here. So we have Jane Doe, her base salary is 100,000. Her release buyout that will be charged to the grant is 25,000. And then this then is routed for the various signatures on the form. Once it reaches our area fully approved, we would go ahead and enter this. And as I mentioned, when individuals are salaried, we go ahead and enter this into the PeopleSoft HR system so it redistributes the person's pay every pay period, and then no journal entries are needed. Any questions on that planned effort form? All right. We'll move on to the summer salary worksheet. All right, so this one, we're using Joe Smith. He has budgeted time for the summer. So the top part of this form, you're filling in the individual's name, their employee ID, what their base salary is, which department their appointment is in, and then that where the appointment is, the fund and cost center for that. As I mentioned, you are putting all summer appointments. So in this case, this grant is not until summer 2, but because you have to put all the appointments for the individual, they are teaching, and then they have another grant that they're spending time on in summer 1. And then in summer 2, they're doing the grant that they did the work on in summer 1, they're doing it again in summer 2, and now this grant. It was budgeted at the 4,194, and we're putting that on here. And what this is doing is making sure that during summer 1, the person is not going over what is allowed during summer 1. And that goes back to that not being able to exceed 1.0. And same down here, the requirement at the university is no more than 95%. And if somebody is going over the 95%, they have to provide a dean's letter and it has to be approved by ORI. And the reason for that is if somebody is at 100%, that means they are not taking any vacation time. They are not submitting any new proposals during that summer. They are just doing this work that is on this summer salary worksheet. And then there's approvals for this as well. It does go over a little bit more information with regards to NSF. And then these are the signatures that are required. Any questions on the summer salary worksheet?
I have another question.
No
I
problem.
have one faculty member who's teaching a 4 credit hour class in summer 1. And with his grant pay, it's putting him over to get the full grant pay over that maximum by like $1,600. If we do an appeal and get a letter, are those typically approved, or is it not something that would be approved?
It really does depend. It, I mean, we don't tell people not to submit it, so I would submit it. There might be a few more questions asked about it, but you know, especially if it's just for one session, I would go ahead and submit the letter for approval. Usually when it's over the full summer, that's when there's more questions, concerns about somebody being at 100%.
Got,
It's covering 4 months instead of just 2 months.
got you. And at this point, the grant ends at the end of summer 1.
Okay.
And he's not teaching summer 2, so.
Okay.
So, okay, I'll talk with him. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Any other questions? All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I appreciate everybody attending. As I mentioned, we will have this recorded and out there on our website as well as all the other sessions. Let me go back actually to the presentation. We have 2 more coming up. Next month is oh, sorry. It is next month is the university prior approval form, budget revisions, and no cost extensions. And those happen on the second Thursday of the month. And then in May, we have our yearly eCert one, kind of just as a review of how you're using eCert, reporting that you can use, as well as how you pre-review and confirm. So those are coming up on our next trainings. So thank you all again for attending, and I hope we'll see you at the next ones. Have a good day.